All right, welcome everyone to the Portland Utility meeting for January 18th. Under Portland City Code and state law, the Portland Utility Board is holding this meeting electronically. Board members and relevant city staff are attending remotely, electronically, or by phone, and the city has made it available for the public to listen to this audio broadcast of this meeting. The meeting is being recorded, and the public will have an opportunity to comment during the public comment portion of the agenda, and they can also provide written testimony to the board by emailing utilityboard@portlandoregon.gov. Pub believes and acts upon anti-racist principles. In our meeting spaces and interactions with Pub, while every person has the right to share their personal perspective, we stand against wrongful conduct, particularly any conduct that is targeted towards people that have been made vulnerable by systemic inequities. And this means stepping up as a community when there is wrongful conduct and fostering a space of learning and growth. And the way that we do this is we speak up and we speak out. Each of us on this board is empowered to maintain the culture of the Portland Utility Board, and we will focus on the impacted individual or population, condemning the conduct, not the person.
Good morning. My name is Amy Archer-Masters, and I'll quickly run through the meeting guidelines. Please state your name before you speak, and if appropriate, who you're addressing or that you're addressing the group. The chat box is only viewable by me, so please limit any chats to technical and logistical issues, including signing up for public comment, asking for technical assistance, or reminding us if you've been waiting to speak and have not been called on. The raise hand function is primarily used by the board. The co-hosts may lower your hand after you've begun speaking just to maintain the flow of conversation. If you are connecting by phone, you may need to press *9 to raise your hand. Videos may be turned on when speaking, if desired, not required. Please mute your microphone when you're not speaking, and members of the public will be muted except when giving public comment. If connecting by phone, you may need to press *6 to mute and unmute yourself. My screen went blank. All right, hold on just a moment. Public comment, as mentioned, will be taken during the comment period early in the meeting. Please send a message to me or raise your hand when we get to that point, and you will be called on. It's also available just prior to any formal board vote after a motion has been made and seconded by board members. I will pass it back to you, Robin.
All right, so the agenda for today, we have a few brief items we'd like to touch on, kind of continue to focus on the budget timeline, as well as get an update on Ecoroofs. And then we'll spend the majority of the conversation actually discussing the Natural Resources Service Delivery Assessment, kind of reviewing our joint meeting, the pros and cons of it, and what we can do moving forward. And then, of course, we have some follow-up announcements, I think, regarding volunteering for the ARC meetings. So go ahead to the next one. Does anyone have any disclosures of communications? Please raise your hand. Go ahead, Bob. Thank you.
Willamette Riverkeeper through me has had a huge number of communications with all the council offices and Bureau of Planning and others regarding the recent housing package that affects BES programs and also the Natural Resource Bureau. So we've been working that pretty much nonstop.
Thank you for that, and thank you for being so engaged. Is there anyone else who has a disclosure of communication before we move on? All right, so we'll be on to public comment. Amy, has anyone submitted written comment before the meeting today?
I have not received anything in advance, so if you're in the room and wish to give public comment, please go ahead and raise your hand or unmute and start speaking.
All right, I'm not seeing any hand raised, so we can move on to the next portion. All right, so a few items that we'll be looking at, mostly want to focus on the fact that it's budget season. Amy, I'm not sure if you wanted me to just read off of this one or if I should give a little bit more background.
Yeah, you can give whatever background, and I can chime in with additional if needed.
All right. So yeah, with the budget, I think we're just trying to navigate how we can be the most successful with our time and engagement. Um, I believe we have a February 1st work session that's not specifically on this, but the following week there is the Public Works work session, which likely will be a lot of information gathering for us, not necessarily speaking. And then we are coming upon the requested budget um, midway through February. And so we'll be deep into reading those multi-page budgets from each bureau. And then we are looking at a rate hearing in early March, which I believe is a bit earlier than usual. And so we'll just have to navigate that with intention. And we've got a few dates in April and May. But other than that, Amy, do you want to add anything specifically to the budget area?
Yeah, so just a few words about deliverables for pub. So typically, I did confirm that part of the requested budget submission, as in the past, includes a report from the budget advisory committees for the bureaus. So typically, pub has included a requested budget letter. Because that's so early in the process, typically, as we've discussed before, that often has been more values and framing and just kind of some early thoughts on what's going to be requested in the budget and what Hub is either has as priorities or concerns. So that's something that will need to be crafted and submitted. As has been discussed, you did do a letter to the bureaus that had a lot of that foundational information, the values and priorities. And so either that letter or a reworked version of that letter could be submitted with the requested budget. You will have one more meeting, or actually two more meetings before the requested budget, but that you have one on February 6th and then another just that following week on the 15th. So documents would need to be prepared prior to that. So you will need to have just some general discussion about whether there's additional content that you want to make sure is in that requested budget letter, whether it's regarding some of the big decisions that are being made related to natural resources or rates or anything else that you have as a priority. So that's an option, and wanted to just open it up to the floor to see if there's anything that folks are feeling is a priority to make sure is included in that initial letter. What's different this year, as Robin mentioned, is that the rate hearing's a lot earlier. The reason for that is a positive one. They're trying to do the rate hearing earlier so that council is making decisions and giving guidance to the bureaus about the rates earlier in the process so that we don't end up in those kind of final 11th hour decisions that are made at the very end of the process, like in the prior year. But for the pub, since you have limited number of meetings, that does have impact on you because the March 5th rate hearing is likely one of your main opportunities to give any directed testimony to council regarding rates and any of the decisions that kind of fall out as a result of the rate decision. And so that means that over this next month, there's a lot of content to cover as far as understanding the budgets from the bureaus and also developing your talking points and whatever it is you want to say to council. Often you've given testimony and created verbal talking points and then followed up with a more detailed letter. So that's still an option that could be done this year. But if decisions are made at that March 5th meeting that have impact, then that is where you would want to make sure that by then is when your voice is heard.
Thank you for that. It looks like Bob has something to say. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I'm concerned that we've really lost connection to our purpose for existing here. I sat on budget committees before the pub was created, and now I sit on them as the pub. And the budget committees that met before pub existed met starting in the fall. They met several times. They had a lot of expertise on them. People who really had financial expertise could really go through a budget really well. I don't include myself among those, by the way, but um, the pub was created to take it to a higher level. The concern when the pub was created was that there wasn't enough oversight. There had been misspending. There were foolish moves. That it was hard, even with that extended process, to get your head around a budget this complicated. And that what we really needed was a standing committee that met on an ongoing basis year round with long-term participants that had real expertise on it around budgets, as well as other stakeholder interests. But that was the genesis of what we are today. And we're not even close to that. We're now relegated to basically submitting superficial comments at the last minute at a high level. It's the antithesis, I think, of what was anticipated when we were created. I'm not sure how to rectify that this year, but I wanted to put that on the record because somehow we've morphed into something very, very different. And I would argue something much less significant because for all the values that we care about, the rubber hits the road in the budget. We can put all kinds of wonderful concepts into a budget letter. They'll nod and smile. But we saw just a couple of weeks ago with this transfer of assets and people from one bureau to another. That stuff doesn't even play a role when the big decisions are made. And so you have to get down in the weeds, count, look at the numbers, and so on. So I just want to flag that for us because I think we need to think very, very seriously about that in terms of our efficacy, in terms of our relevance, and in terms of who we add to the pub over time, and in terms of what we prioritize during the year. Because as far as I'm concerned, we could submit the letter we've written. We could spend 3 hours working on it and do a lot of verbiage changing around and that kind of a thing. But I don't think it's going to have any real impact whatsoever at this point, the way we're doing it.
Thank you,
I'm
Bob,
done.
for that. Yep, you're good. And go ahead, Alexis.
Yeah, thanks for raising that, Bob. You've put in words some discontent that I've been feeling, and so I appreciate kind of the context and kind of posing that question. And I think it's something we should continue to talk about and think about how we can be impactful and play the role that we I think we all joined the pub to to try to play. I raised my hand because I was curious about when we're going to hear from the bureaus on budget on their budget development process and where they are, and get an update on kind of what they're thinking, especially given the guidance from the mayor.
So the plan was to hear from the bureaus likely in the February meetings. We had some discussions early on as the budget process was still evolving, and it's a particularly challenging year because the calendar was just approved last week, and the bureaus are participating in these service area conversations that kind of change some of how they're developing and submitting the budgets. So we did have early discussions with the chairs and others about whether to have an initial presentation of content that was, here's what we think we might be submitting, and then later coming back and presenting what the reality really looked like. As the calendar has been finalized, I think likely the 2 meetings in February will be where you get a lot of the content of both of those pieces, because the work session kind of falls in between your 2 meetings, but your 2 meetings are only a week apart. So it's kind of a tight timeline. But my expectation is that you'll be getting a lot of the content from the bureaus at the February 6th and the February 15th meeting. Bureau budget folks are in the room as well. So if they have different information about kind of how the process is evolving from their perspective, certainly encourage you to raise your hand and speak up. But that was, at least from staff's perspective, what the expectation was.
This is Robin. I just wanted to say, in regards to what Bob had said and what Alexis had agreed with, I think we had mentioned at the end of last year's budget process that we may be more successful if, instead of, like, in the long term, if our letters to council are not just values focused, but being like that trade-off specifically, and navigating the budget as like a, hey, we have these greater values, but like Bob said, pen to paper, we have to be willing to say this budget cut aligns with our values more so than this. And so I think being really mindful of that will help us as we go forward. And I was also wondering if, for this February 16th, or even the 1st or the 8th, would it be important for us to respond or add to our current values statement to align it with the priorities that the mayor has put forward in memos 1 and 2, to give us a more whole list, to be like, these are our values and these are how our values are worked within the context that the mayor has given us. And then, yeah, when we actually see those budgets and we're saying, hey, we're navigating equity, we have to make sure that services are provided and we're not seeing a steep cutoff in services, that we are willing to say some things have to be cut. We have to put a line in the sand. And I think, yeah, I just think last year we kind of came to the conclusion that we could be more forceful, or more successful in our budget recommendations if we were less focused on not less focused on our values, but more focused on how our values translate into the budget, and giving numbers and giving locations within the budget where we are like, hey, this doesn't align with our values, and we see that this could be a successful place to cut staffing, or just navigate the less money that we have in the current revenue stream. I'll let that end my comment. And so I will go on to Julia.
Yeah, thank you. This is also in response to this topic, into what Bob said. I was also under the impression that we were more deeply engaged, and throughout the entire budget process, long before this stage of the process in the past. And I think we have a challenge in that we're like a non-volunteer, commission. And we tried really hard to diversify who was on this commission, so that it didn't require that high of a bar of like, oh, you do know how to go line through a budget and really go deep on that. But it's like, that is one of the purposes of this entity. And I would just I don't think we're going to be able to do this in this meeting, but I think it would be helpful to get a briefing on how we actually did do this in the past, in previous iterations of this commission, because I don't think this is how they did it. It is really hard at this stage, even if you have a forceful letter that's not just values driven. The time for where the rubber meets the road is earlier in this process, during those budget meeting processes. And I just, did we have appointed people that showed up to those meetings to engage early and often? And did they report back to this space so we could deliberate prior to this stage? I'm just kind of curious to know, what would it actually look like for us to engage at a higher level, and how have we done that in the past? Because I can't imagine it was exactly this process the entire time the pub has been around, because it doesn't feel like that's. Anyway, I probably speaking in circles now, so yeah, I will stop.
I think that there's a couple challenges with what is, I think, being faced this year. The process has changed just over the years. I haven't been involved in all of the years of the pub, but have over the last few years. And if you'll remember, part of the approach this year was continuing to try to evolve the pub's process to engage in more impactful ways. And rather than diving into some of those line by line details of positions and the specific amounts in the year-to-year budget, was looking at a higher level at larger policy issues, engaging with the bureaus throughout the year on those broader issues. And the goal for this year was to be providing those values statements to the bureau so that they could be used as they're developing the budget, and then have a discussion as you look at the budget on how the budget was responsive to the values that you've stated. I think it's important, as you mentioned, to remember that the diversity of the pub has evolved over time, and part of this process was being responsive to the makeup of the board and the different perspectives that were represented around the table, and an attempt to engage in a more meaningful way, and not be focused solely on the year-to-year budget, but more on the long-term budget issues and policy issues and program development. So I understand some of the frustrations. The Bureau's budgets are incredibly complicated. And so every year it has been a struggle for the makeup of the pub to identify how to engage the most effectively. And each year, we've had lessons learned from the approach that we've made. This year was a slightly different approach. And it also is falling at a time where the city is moving very quickly, and there are large issues that are moving and driving that forward, such as the charter change and the restructuring, and things that are significantly impacting anybody's ability to engage in the budget effectively. I did want to just share that I have had an anonymous comment come in just about some of the statements that have been made and the criticism about the skill set in the room, because the skill set of the pub members who are in the room is incredibly valuable. It is diverse, and to the judgment and statements that have been made about that skill set, I think are not holistic or appropriate given the way that the pub has evolved. It's always changing based on the makeup of the board, but the decisions that have been made, particularly at the direction of the chairs at the time at the beginning of this budget process, have been to maximize the use of the skill sets of the people who are around the table. So there's just concern about I guess the way in which the statements are being made that are critical of those skill sets and the way that your skills are being used, and that is an inappropriate categorization of those skills.
Looks like Joe has something to say. Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you, Joe Spada, ex-officio Water Bureau staff. I just want to chime in and say that I feel like last year, Pub was, I guess, being involved at the very tail end of the process, and I believe it was Pub's intention to get on a path that was getting involved earlier on, and I feel like that's happening. So I don't think that Pub is failing by any means on what the intentions are for Pub altogether. I think that the shift of trying to get back on track of being involved in the budget process earlier is happening. I feel like it's not a process that can necessarily happen, overnight. I mean, obviously we're meeting all throughout the year, but I feel like Pub is getting back on track to regain some of those old values that were mentioned earlier. So I just wanted to chime in and say that.
And thank you all for that. I would say with this, I think it might be beneficial if Amy has the capacity to maybe send some of the maybe the 3 prior years, some of the engagements that we've sent around the budget season to see where the values have stayed the same and if we have felt that we are really making progress comparative to like a budget request letter that we sent a couple years ago to see if we're gaining traction. Because as someone who's been on the board for 3.5 years, sometimes it does feel it's a little bit hard to navigate prior years and the history of the pub to really always build on top of previous successes. But I know that everyone in the room is pushing for that. And so I'll hand it off to Bob and then we'll move on with the next comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, at the risk of belaboring the point a little bit, I don't think we're back on track. I think that, again, I want to go back to kind of the purpose of the pub, which was to keep people who would be engaged year round in budget decisions that could really be brought on and brought to a sophisticated, deep level on the budget. And, my experience with budgets over the years has been that, most of the work, I know we're a little bit off this year because it's crazy this year, but usually the budget committees were most effective, the ones that had their comments in by November. That was usually the timeline we were on to really have already been effective. So we were ahead of the budget rather than responding to a massive document after the fact. And we're not even close to that kind of timeline anymore. And we're not on a year-round track either, where we're really kind of making the effort to make sure that the budget is a significant part of every single meeting, for example, and that new board members are being brought in and taught how the budget works and walked through it. And that kind of level is what I'm trying to get at, because otherwise it is almost impossible to have a significant impact on a municipal budget. They're just too big, too complicated, and there are too many forces moving them at this point in the process. Major changes are typically not made once you get into February, March, April, May at the behest of the community. Those things have to be done almost in the off season to make them functional in the budget process. So that's what I'm getting at in terms of what I'm thinking, at least. And that may not be the mission of the pub anymore, but I think we need to be realistic about what we can and can't do if we come in February.
Thank you for that comment, Bob. And I do see value in purposefully engaging with our budget process every month, possibly every meeting, because I do also feel that in my time on pub that we have been kind of late to the process. A lot of our critiques have been that the public is not really as engaged as we're told that they are engaged. And I think oftentimes our advisory board made of public members is also a casualty to that issue, and that there is something to really focusing on the budget during the off season, because that will put us in the best position. And so I'm liking the majority of what I'm hearing from you, with the intent of just being more engaged, trying to be as impactful as we can, getting into the line by line if necessary. But with that, unless Amy has any final comments on the budget, I think that there might be a request for volunteers for something.
Well, I think that it certainly will document the opinions that have been shared today. I do just want to point out that we don't have a quorum as of yet, and that some of the folks who were engaged in the decisions that we had throughout the year about how to engage around budget are some of those people who aren't in the room here today. So I think getting a full, well-rounded perspective from all of the board members would be valuable, certainly as we design any sort of process moving forward. We always are trying to improve and evolve that process, and it could be that prior membership moved in a direction that current membership is wanting something different. And so that's something that we can revisit as a full board. We're still in the circumstances where we're in the middle of a budget year, where you do have opportunity to give input. So if there is a desire to give input through that process, then those windows of time where you can do that are coming up pretty quickly now. And there will be opportunity to have your voice heard through that process. So I'll connect back with the Bureau folks about next steps as far as hearing where they are in the current year budget process, and loop back with Robin around how to plan the upcoming agendas. Given where we are at, I was just going to do a time check as well. I am going to move to the next topic, and we'll come back to budget as we plan and move forward at the next meeting. That sounds okay to you, Robin?
Yes, it does. Are we going to? There we go. Yep. Continue.
So we can either do a brief Ecoroof update now, or we can do that at the end during announcements, so that we can move to the primary topic around natural resources. So just let me know what you want to do, or maybe Bob, you can share how much time is needed for a brief update and identification if there's any.
I just need probably 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'd like to have Bob speak on the Ecoroofs. So go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, the very quick update is that, this housing relief package has been working its way through the city. Originally, there were a couple of regulations that were going to be waived for housing developers, including the green roof mandate, and probably less importantly to this group, the bird safe building mandate, and also some public involvement. Planning Commission rejected removing requirements for green roofs, bird safe buildings, and put back in some public notice requirements. They had a very good discussion about it, I thought. City Council got the package a month ago, actually 3 weeks ago, and Commissioner Gonzalez tried to restore those suspensions, basically, so that, in fact, developers would not have to follow green roof, bird-friendly building, and public notice requirements. Those amendments were unfortunately introduced the evening before the hearing. It blew the hearing apart. I think 40 or 50 people testified, and I think they said they got 300 letters, despite the fact that there was virtually no notice. The long and the short of it is council voted yesterday on those amendments. The housing package as a whole is very large and will probably pass unanimously next week. So there's going to be some major changes made to accommodate housing. But based on the vote yesterday, what will not be in there is a suspension of green roofs mandates, bird-friendly building mandates, and some of the public notice mandates. So from my perspective, that's good news. BES, I know, was very concerned about removal of green roof requirements. Commissioner Maps translated that concern in the hearing and voted against these amendments, these last-minute amendments. And so right now, basically, from a BES perspective, I think we held the ground that we had. From a public process standpoint, it was, again, I think, a train wreck. They actually had to stop the hearing at one point for 30 minutes to confer with the lawyers because they tried to add more amendments after people were testifying. And then I think, again, it gets back to the conversation we just had, which is these are big changes that really are important. And this is exactly the kind of stuff that's supposed to go through these oversight bodies that we have, that we all invest a lot of time. These kind of changes should not come flying out of left field the night before a hearing. There was nothing that required. They could have added 1,000 things to that package. The package was already huge. There was absolutely no urgency to do what council did. And again, it's why I'm very concerned about how the city looks at these oversight bodies. We dodged the issue this time because in one case there was a 3-2 vote. Two of the amendments went down 3-2. One went down 4-1. But if we're going to be relevant in these kinds of discussions, that kind of stuff needs to stop happening. There is a place for emergency amendments, absolutely. There is a place for council to deliberate and add things and change things, absolutely. But this kind of process completely undermines the systems that we have in place for checks and balances. That's my summary.
Thank you for that, Bob. Did anyone want to respond to that before we moved along? Go ahead, Karen.
Hi, everyone. I apologize for being late. I mean, I guess my only response is just, once again, thank you, Bob, for bird dogging this and bringing it to our attention and doing everything in your power to keep or to make boards, and particularly this one, relevant. And I don't quite know what what to say and where to go from here. I mean, it's certainly enormously discouraging, and we're gonna have to figure it out. I mean, if this board is going to continue as we're recruiting new members, in good faith, I don't feel like we can recruit people to a board where we can't demonstrate that the board exists for a purpose and has meaning and is relevant. So yeah, thanks for bringing it to our attention.
Well, one
Go
thing
ahead, Bob.
one thing we can do, and I appreciate Jack being here today from Commissioner Mapps's office, is, I think we can request, I don't think we need to put it in writing, but I guess I would request that if any of these kinds of things come back, because there is a risk that was alluded to in the hearing, that we're gonna vote it down today, but maybe we'll discuss it again in the near future, which I hope they don't. But if these kinds of things come back, either these exact things or different things come back, we would appreciate the opportunity. I would appreciate at least the opportunity to have them brought before the pub. That's what we're here for. And I think that's a way to slow down these last minute train wrecks. If in fact the commissioner has it from us that we would like to hear these things, I think that's a way to say, hey, you introduced these amendments the night before. They weren't emergencies. They weren't urgent. And I want to give my oversight body a chance to actually have a chance to weigh in. I think that's a perfectly legitimate request and a very reasonable way to slow down these end runs. So that's my personal request as a pub member to the commissioner. And if others agree, I think that'd be great. Or not, dead silence. It's fine.
I'm seeing some thumbs up, and I personally agree with that. Anything that we can do to successfully engage the public meaningfully, I think that's a valid request. I'm assuming the silence is also agreement. But with that, let's actually leave the Ecoroofs on that note, do a little maybe work behind the scenes if we need to. And let's get started on the second half of our meeting, which is around the natural resource service delivery assessment. We'd like to do a little bit debriefing from that joint meeting. If there's any additional questions or answers, we have the capacity for a little bit of feedback, and then just kind of navigating our next steps. So Amy, with this one, is there a following slide, or how would you like me to navigate the debrief?
So I don't have a following slide, but I can pull the slides down. I do have prior documents that you've submitted about the decision process, or can pull up just a blank Word document as far as brainstorm. I think you kind of did a good overview summary of kind of all the pieces. You do have a variety of staff, both from Parks and BES in the room. So I think a good place to start is just hopefully everybody had a chance to review the presentation materials that I sent out, for particularly for anybody who wasn't able to attend the meeting or missed some of the content because of the timing of the last meeting. And so if there's any questions that have come up from the additional content that you saw, or just since that prior meeting, this would be the opportunity to ask staff. And if they're able, they can answer in the room. If it's something that we need to get information and get back to you, then we can do that in writing or at a future meeting. But anything that would help you just further identify your needs for developing talking points or written testimony for the work session that is scheduled for February 1st. I also have the slides available from that prior meeting that I can pull up on screen if anybody wants to reference those. So just open the floor for pub members who either have questions, or let me know if there's any particular materials that you want me to pull up on screen so that you can see them again.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, do we have an answer yet from legal about the using ratepayer funds for natural resources? I brought this up a couple times and I have yet to hear whether legal has said that that's legal or not. Not that the council can't tell us to do it, but the question for legal, whether or not it's okay to use BES resources or water resources, ratepayer funds to do this. Because that question still hasn't been answered.
Is there somebody from BES who has an answer to that question? At the prior meeting, I think Don was able to respond to the questions that had been asked of legal, but I know Don's connection is a little iffy today. But if you're available, please speak up.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I hope that my internet holds up and my voice. Chris, we have not had any additional conversations with legal, but I think one point I want to make really clear here is the definition of natural resources. We're still working on what that means, and it's tied to the word operational and operations. So it's difficult for legal to weigh in at this time on exactly what we're talking about without a clear definition of what natural resources we're speaking of, what operations or operational means, and then also what is tied to BES's charter. And because, of course, BES's stormwater work brings us into the space of natural resource management and natural area management. And so it isn't just a question as can BES ratepayer dollars be used for natural resources? It's which natural resources as related to BES's charter. And that has not been agreed upon in any detail with Portland Parks and Recreation.
Just to follow up then, I heard the caveat there. When will those definitions be forthcoming?
We're working on it. In fact, we had plans to work on it this week, and things got set back because of the storm. So our respective teams are working on those definitions, and it's again part of our work plan. So it's the work has started and will continue to happen. And I don't know if Chris or Shane or anyone wants to speak to the schedule of when we might have content that we could take to our legal counsel, but there's first needs to be this work between staff to differentiate which natural resources we're talking about and which are associated with BES's charter and legal and regulatory responsibilities.
Thank you. Not to find you difficult, but it's just, to me, it seems like a very basic thing that we need.
Oh yeah, no, it's not. I'm not. I appreciate, as I did last week. I really appreciate the question, and it's a great starting point. It's where we need to start. So keep asking.
Thanks.
I can speak to the schedule if that's of interest. It won't solve what Chris specifically asked, but we do have our February 1st council work session, so we're going to have to make some progress on those definitions that Dawn just talked about before that date. And also everything will definitely be run through city attorney's office before moving any kind of resources.
Thank you all for that. Go ahead, Bob.
I appreciate the question as well, and I agree. It would have been a great starting point. It's not a starting point. Unfortunately, council made a decision, and now it's a midpoint. But that being said, I'm curious about the council work session on the 1st. I think we heard that there was an opportunity potentially for the different oversight committees, Portland Parks Board, and the Forestry Commission to participate in that. And I'm wondering if that's still true. I think it'd be great if we could have a representative on that.
This is Amy, and the Commissioner Maps staff, one of their representatives is in the room, but I think Michelle at the prior meeting had confirmed that if Pub is interested, that they can request for Pub to be invited testimony at the work session. So that is just need confirmation from you all that that's what you want, as well as one or two volunteers who might be interested in providing that testimony at that work session, so that we can identify both in this meeting or between now and that work session, kind of finalize what the talking points would be for whoever the volunteers are. I have heard that the other boards that are involved, Parks and Urban Forestry Commission, are requesting testimony. They're providing joint testimony at that work session. So I believe that request has come through their commissioner's office. And I see Adina raised your hand. Is that in response to this specific question? If so, go ahead and speak up. Otherwise, we'll go to Alexis next.
It is. I hope everyone can hear me.
You are cutting out, Adina, so I cannot hear you currently.
They're cutting out for me as well.
Okay.
I can tell Adina's speaking, but I can't hear at all what she's saying.
I will message Adina in the background and let them know that we cannot hear, and see if there's something that I can share on her behalf. Maybe in the interim, if there's something more on that specific question. Otherwise, we can move to Alexis until we have some information from Adina.
Go ahead, Alexis.
All right. Yeah, thanks. I had the same question about the work session, and I do think it would make sense for Pub to provide testimony there, to request to be invited. So I'll put that to fellow board members. And then my question is, if after these working meetings, if the bureaus, the interbureau team can share like a written update with PUB so that and the other advisory boards, so that we're kind of kept up to date with how thinking is evolving with this question around definitions, et cetera. I think it would be helpful to kind of keep up to date with thinking, especially as things are rapidly moving forward. So just curious about kind of what anticipated communications with the advisory bodies will be along the way, not just providing testimony, but can we have written updates or attendance at meetings to provide updates about these meetings. That's it.
I'll chime in. I know Dawn's still having some internet issues as well. Yes, we'd be happy to give written updates, or come to meetings regularly as you request to talk about the topic more. We have a series of Parks and BES meetings happening these few weeks prior to the work session, so we'll have more material to share as we progress towards February 1st.
And I will add quickly, thank you for that, Shayna. I will add quickly that we are working with our consultant, Chris Wallace-Caldwell, to put together a proposal for some sort of like regular engagement from all the boards, perhaps with a small project team, or you know, just a way to bring more focus into the conversations, so it's not just the whole board kind of catching as catch can updates from the project and exchanging emails and that kind of thing, but really some opportunities for all of our advisory boards to have active participation as a team member in some capacity. So we haven't ironed that out, but we have discussed that, and I think there's a general agreement, and I hope that we can come back to you with the proposal for that kind of involvement.
Thanks, Dawn and Shayna. That would be great. I really appreciate you working with the facilitators to help put together a process there. Thank you.
Hi, this is Chris Wallace-Caldwell. I'll just add that I think part of that was wanting to hear from the advisory bodies what that might look like, what would work best. So hopefully we can get some input from PUB as well as the Parks Board and the Urban Forestry Commission on that.
This is Amy, and I'll just loop back that Adina did apologize for connectivity issues and did just echo that they agreed to include PUB, the Parks Board, and Urban Forestry Commission reps in a to be developed work group that was referenced. So that was the additional comment there. I did want to just let PUB members know I got a message from Bob, who needs to drop off for a work conflict. But I wanted to point out that at that point, you will lose a quorum again. So you're kind of in a tricky spot right at this moment, because if you want to make any formal decision, you will need to do that quickly before he drops off. But I'm not sure that you have necessarily all the content developed, but you could delegate that to the subcommittee of whoever's remaining to continue to develop that content. Bob did indicate that he would be willing to speak on PUB's behalf, or be one of the volunteers to speak on PUB's behalf if folks were interested in that. I don't know if anybody else is interested, but you would want to formally vote to delegate your talking points to any volunteers, even if you're still continuing to develop those as a subcommittee. Karen,
Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, I will make that motion. I move that PUB develop testimony to present at the February 1st work session, and that Bob Salinger and one other volunteer, if there is one, present that testimony, and delegate to those two individuals finalization of talking points to present on February 1st.
Second, Chris Richard.
Okay, any further discussion? Then we would move to public comment if there's anybody in the room who wants to make comment on the motion. I am not seeing any, so let's go ahead through the roll. Let's start with Robin.
Robin Castro, voting member. I vote yes.
Bob Solinger, voting member. I vote yes, and I guess I just vote yes. Yes, that's it.
Chris Richard, voting member. I vote yes.
Alexis Rife, voting member. I vote yes.
Julia DeGraw, voting member. I also vote yes.
And Karen Williams, voting member, yes.
Okay, motion passes. Thank you for that. So you can, thank you, Bob, for sticking around in order to get the vote through. And the rest of the group can just continue discussion about what you would want the key points of your testimony to be. The vote did delegate to Bob and another volunteer. So before we're done, hopefully we'll identify who that additional person might be. And I will work with those folks to document anything that you all agree to in the interim. So the floor is back open for PUP members.
Go ahead, Julia.
I unfortunately have a work obligation starting soon. I mean, technically it starts at noon and I should hop off soon. I'm potentially willing to volunteer, although the timing might be really hard for me. So I would prefer somebody else volunteers. But if no one else does, I will try to fill that gap.
Go ahead, Karen.
Thanks, Julia. I was just going to ask if Amy had handy the letter that we had sent regarding this issue and could maybe share that on screen. Otherwise, I'll hunt through my my files and try and find it, but it seems to me like we can pull a number of, we probably don't have to develop new talking points is all I'm thinking. I think yeah, beautiful. Okay, thank you. So maybe we could just start by pulling out, sort of highlights from this letter. I would say, I don't think we need to belabor a lot of the, our how irked we are by the public process failures. I mean, that's to some extent at this point water under the bridge, but I think pulling out the really particular concerns and recommendations like the one that Chris has raised I think that's the direction we should go, is kind of forward looking, what we recommend that council and the bureaus really take consideration of and take to heart in moving forward on this. So, actionable, I guess that's what I'm saying, sort of actionable recommendations.
I'm just scrolling through the letter a bit, but certainly let me know if there's somewhere you want me to focus. A lot of the beginning parts are the criticism of the process, the general support of the consolidation of programs, but concern about the process. I think it's towards the end where you make some specific requests regarding the work group. I think your point is a good one, Karen. In Bob's absence, I guess the only benefit to continuing to talk about the process, not specifically necessarily about the decision that was made, but I know that one of the pieces that Bob has continued to advocate for is slowing down the process and the potential revisit of that based on enough time for the work group to do its work and for the public to be adequately engaged. So the current process still moves relatively quickly. So if you have criticism about that process, then and the roadmap as it lays currently, that would be an opportunity to share that.
Go ahead, Alexis.
Yeah, thanks for raising that, Amy. I think that that is something important that we should continue to raise, and it came up on the joint meeting. Was that just last week? The snowstorm and ice has thrown off my sense of time, but I think it would be around public participation and engagement with the public on the issue, I think is another thing that we should highlight as something important, and slowing down process. I remain kind of concerned about decisions being made around reorganizing things prior to the transition. And I know I missed the meeting when this was discussed in more detail, but I do think that us continuing to highlight the power of slowing down and being inclusive and seeking feedback from the community in a very careful and thoughtful and intentional way is really critical, and something that I know it feels like we're kind of shouting into a black box or whatever the right metaphor is, but I think it's something we should continue to highlight. And when we're able to do that via spoken testimony, I think it offers the opportunity for more of a dialogue and than just sending letters.
I see a thumbs up from Karen on that comment. This is Robin, a separate comment, not responding to Alexis necessarily. I know that going into that meeting and coming out of the joint meeting, I was heavily frustrated. And the way that the joint meeting was essentially, our joint meeting was started without actual quorum. And I'm not sure if this is necessarily the place, like if in the letter we need to make a complaint about that. But I think the frustration that people had passed along to me privately and that I felt as well illustrates what we're saying, because right on the screen it says coordinate joint meetings with pub and the parks board to make sure that we're getting consistent information and it's collaborative and planning and feedback. Personally, I've definitely left with a salty taste in my mouth after the joint meeting, feeling that it wasn't fully joint and that it really showed to us that like we are representatives of the public, and we have said in this letter that the public is not adequately being engaged. And I feel like what happened in the joint meeting, having it start essentially before quorum was hit with all three groups, kind of reflects that it's not individual public members, but it's also public advisory bodies that are meant to represent the public that also feel like we are being engaged, but it's very superficially. And part of me just felt like the critique that we have of how hard it is for our community to get involved was directly shown to us as how hard it was for us to be successfully part of that joint meeting. And I was wondering if that would be somewhere that we add in this letter, or if it's just kind of a conversation that we have amongst the board. Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, Robin, just what you were saying there caused me to come up with a question that I have. And I guess it's to the bureaus, maybe to Jack, if Jack is still with us. But so Robin, you were saying, putting something in the letter, and I don't think as I understand it, we're not really developing, we're developing potential talking points in a verbal testimony. I suppose it could be presented in writing as well. And just for what it's worth, Robin, I think I agree with incorporating somehow the sentiment of what you were saying into whatever talking points we deliver, because I do think it continues to be relevant that collaboration means something, and it doesn't mean exactly what happened at the joint meeting. My question is, do we know what the focus of the work session will be? Like, is there an agenda? Are there particular elements of developing the natural resources work plan that is going to be the focus of the work session? And I ask that because I'm thinking that will help us refine what talking points are going to be kind of the most timely and relevant to the work session itself. So do we know anything from our Bureau leadership or Commissioner's office about what the work session, like what's going to be the focus of that?
Shayna
Sure.
or Don, if you could speak up. I know on the schedule, it did speak to, it was a work session on the work plan, which of course you have not seen and probably won't be available until the work session. But if there's staff available, if you could speak up, that would be helpful.
Sure. Hi, this is Shayna again. I forgot to say before, I'm with BES, if not obvious. I'm one of the project managers on this project. So the development of the agenda for the work session is in process, but yes, we will definitely be reviewing a work plan that we will be able to share prior to that. So you have a draft to take a look at. That will be the meat of the presentation. It's kind of the current state of natural resources in the city and a work plan towards implementation of both of the resolutions that intersect with natural resources.
And Shayna, correct me if I'm wrong, but just looking back at the schedule, the plan was to have the work session with council on February 1st and be getting some feedback. And then in March was when you were scheduled to try to connect with advisory boards to get feedback as a work group from the advisory boards. Is that correct?
Yes, although I would offer that we'd be happy to come back in February to get your input on the work session and the draft during that time, and then return again in March with our due date is to deliver the finalized work plan to the CAO in April. So we've got some time to refine it.
And may I ask a follow-on question? This is Karen Williams again. What is the expectation of council at the work session? Are they, receiving information from the bureaus and then asking questions? Are they making decisions? How does that work?
I think Dawn wants to speak to that. Looks like she has.
Yeah. Thank you, Shayna. Don Uchiyama, BES. Apologies, I've not provided proper introductions when speaking. or raise my hand. So appreciate again the opportunity to weigh in, and thank you, Shana, for your response. I would like to say that the work session was requested by the mayor with an understanding that the decision that was made on November 1st was rushed and that not all the information was available to council members to make an informed decision. So the work session is really a follow-up, and there will not be decisions made at the work session. It's a chance to follow up with the detail from all of the programs that are contributing to this space that will help inform, I think, the budget decisions, if not this fiscal year, certainly in the fiscal years ahead and through city transition. So that's the idea, is that this will put us on the course for setting expectations for this work through city transition and through our normal budget cycles.
Thank you for that. I believe Jack has their hand raised.
Yeah, thanks. Jack Jaden with Commissioner Mingus-Vatz's office. In addition to what Shana and Director Uchiyama have shared, I think I just want to also name the tension in the room and the confusion that's shared with a lot of staff. It's shared with a lot of council offices. So there are a lot of questions that have been brought up and not a lot of answers. And so as these work groups and work plan are put together, we're hoping that in the next few weeks, we'll have a little bit more information, perhaps a definition. You know, I've heard through this session today that we haven't fully defined what natural areas means, who it involves. We haven't fully worked out with legal staff how to go about doing this. And the decision was made really quickly, as Bob Salinger pointed out, that a lot of council offices had less than 24 hours to look over what they were voting on. So it was asked by Mayor Wheeler, who said, you know, I don't even understand what's going on here, so I'm calling for a work session to hear more about this. And we've heard that echoed throughout other council offices.
Thank you for that, for the empathy and clarity. Do any board members have anything specific that they think we should bring up as a talking point for the meeting, for the first?
This is Amy, and I just wonder, as staff, I'm not a board member, but I just have a question for staff as well, if you can answer this. The timeline, I understand, you know, you have a deadline of delivering something to the CAO in April. I assume that timeline is somewhat driven by being able to achieve these decisions as part of this budget process. I guess my question is that correct? And if so, then for pub members, another area that you have had some criticism, and so it could be an opportunity. I'm not sure that you could have impact and change that timeline, but since part of what you're talking about is having enough time, then maybe pointing out that additional time may be needed, and whether that would be beneficial to staff or whether the work group is pretty on track and feeling like it's an achievable timeline.
I see Nancy has their hand raised. Go ahead, Nancy.
So, so I'm a staff person at BES, and I thought I heard you say, is this an achievable timeline? And were you asking staff that question?
Yes, I'm curious whether from staff perspective, whether the timeline is, well, maybe there's a difference between reasonable and achievable, but maybe the question is about both.
Okay, well, I haven't vetted this. I'm just going to speak up as staff member, unless Dawn, you want to answer that question.
Well, certainly, this is Donnie Chiyama, BES Director. Certainly, Nancy, I welcome your thoughts on this, but I do want to say that it is a tight timeline, but it's also, we have to think about this in terms of an evolution, and I referenced the typical budget cycles, and so it's very important, I think, for both Director Long and I, that we are working towards progress and that we are incrementally doing whatever we can to advance these ideas and advance the thinking and the commitment. So that's where my mind goes when I'm asked, is this reasonable or feasible? It depends on the definition of what we're going to get done. And I think we have a commitment from staff, from our staff, from both bureaus and from the Water Bureau and BPS and PBOT, that we will work to collaborate to define that mission and advance our agenda most efficiently. And really, we've been saying all along, take advantage of this moment where we have people's attention. There's so many things that are pulling on Portlanders' attention and our leaders' attention. Take advantage of this moment and these conversations to really elevate what we're trying to do for a bigger vision. And so we have to keep the long term in mind. This will take years and decades to build out and to be fully realized, but every year is one cycle that we can advance our ideas and be evaluated on what's getting accomplished and whether or not we're successful. So for me, that's what's important to keep in mind, is that this is what we're evolving into a new form of government, and it's an opportunity for us to be clear about our long-term sustainability and climate objectives.
Yeah, really well put, Dawn. Thank you. And we will do whatever we need to do to accomplish what we need to accomplish. When you start moving positions and programs around, it can be a big disruption. So it's really good to take the time to make sure that you fix more than you break. And by you, I mean we, us. So that's some people.
Thank you both, Dawn and Nancy, for that. Go ahead, Karen.
Thank you, Robin. This is Karen Williams, voting member. It's hard. It's hard. I'm finding it really difficult to be specific in the context of such vagueness and uncertainty. So I guess I just wanted to say that out loud. So I'm kind of struggling with how we can, again, be timely, be relevant, be influential when we sort of kind of don't know exactly what we're shooting for. That's a bad analogy. I don't know. So maybe what we should do, fellow board members, is take a couple steps back and identify what we need out of this process, what we, kind of going back to needs and values, and in particular, I mean, that's coming to mind just because initially I had said, oh, well, we shouldn't really talk about the process because that's water under the bridge. And then everything that we have been talking about, and I agree, it's like it is still relevant and important, is the process. And it's really about the process, not just the outcome, right? It's how you get to the outcome. So I just want to maybe circle back and take back what I said about not having a talking point about process and say, yeah, absolutely. A talking point about slowing down, about not imposing artificial timelines is important, and the gosh, I mean, you know what? Oh man. So how about, sorry, I better let me be quiet for a minute because I'm just having trouble formulating words right now. I'll be back when I can collect my thoughts a little better.
This is Robin. Let me just jump in to ask, because the work plan is currently being drafted, is there any way that staff or people within the bureaus that we work under, that they can pass along like the draft of the draft? I think that'd be my first question. I do see that Dawn has their hand raised, but it looks like they're connecting to audio, and I'm not sure if they would be responding to my comment or Karen's.
I can comment on your request for the work plan. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. So Dawn Nishiyama, Director BES. I think that was a great idea. We can definitely share the draft of the work plan, and I'll work with Shayna to get that to you. I was just going to comment on the previous reflection on process, and I do think I often say it's not just the what, but it's also the how, and so we learned some things from the process of the past, and this is why we're engaging with Catalysis and really trying to put a thoughtful work plan together so that we're clear about the process moving forward. So of course, Pub will need to, weigh in on this as you all see fit. But I do think getting clear about expectations about process is going to help us all understand how to engage, how to make decisions, how to communicate that. So I wanted to say that. And then also, I did want to make a clarification, and this is part, it falls into the category of definitions, and what we're talking about, there's sometimes easy to slip into the language of like just consolidating natural. I think that language might have shown up somewhere, but Parks has been clear with us that they've been specifically talking about operational parts of natural resources, meaning the maintenance, some of the O&M activities. And so again, that's where we have to define what it is that we're talking about, because it isn't a consolidation of all natural resources entirely into parks. It is by definition, we're asking ourselves what parts would make sense. So I just want to put a caution in there that we have to watch the language around this, because it is yet to be defined. And I'll just close with saying that, again, the process really does matter. And I really invite you to think about, again, this idea of having someone involved as a project team member, and to think about a process that maybe processes that have worked well for you and help us be successful in this space. I really, it's such an energy drain to have to continue to revisit processes that have not worked. Let's take this moment now that we have, since we haven't initiated anything yet, and we're still drafting this work plan. Let's get our process clear so that we that we get success for the resources, success for our green and blue infrastructure, success for this bigger vision. So again, I'm just inviting us to define the process as we need it, and we will welcome your comments and ideas about that.
Thank you, Dawn. All right, just looking at the time, and if I'm understanding the point of the February 1st meeting, it's to get extra information on what exactly has happened since the November 1st vote. And so just from my perspective, it feels like we don't have much extra information besides getting talking points from the letter that we've already submitted. And then if we are successful in receiving like a draft of the draft work plan, possibly adding a comment or two, But if I'm understanding the purpose of this work plan, it's important that we're there, because the intention of the work group on the 1st is to be like, hey, we don't have all the information, and this feels like it was a rushed decision, and we're even being asked to make commentary on things that were rushed that we don't quite have a lot of information on. And so, yeah, I think it'd be valuable for us to draw talking points from the letter that we've already submitted, the one that's on the screen. And then if we are able to get like a draft of the draft, have someone review that and see if there's any more commentary that we can add. But with that, Amy, I wasn't sure if we should put a pin in this right here and then move to the next, because I am about to have to drop off as well.
Yes, and I did want to just point out that we had Bob volunteer, we had Julia as a possible volunteer. I did also hear from Rosalind, one of the ex officios, that they were also available if Pub was interested in having them be present to testify as well. But Dawn, I think you had something more to add, so let's close with that, and then I'll pull up the other piece.
Great, thank you, Amy. Don Uchiyama, BES. I just wanted to add on the work plan. We have to be respectful of all of the advisory boards and stakeholders. So just know that we'll get this to you, but we'll need to do that in concert with our engagement plan and our commitments to other boards. So we'll get it to you as soon as we can. But we do need to think of the other advisory boards.
All right, thank you, Don. Let me get back to the slides. And I don't think we have very much to add, so I will pull together some of what was said as well as the materials, and I'll connect with those volunteers around the work session. I certainly will share with you all whatever we receive in advance. At a minimum, the bureaus, when they have a session with council, have materials prepared just in advance of that meeting. So probably some of that may come just prior to the meeting, but we will pass on whatever is available. Just a reminder to folks, I'm still looking for confirmation for a February and an April at ARC committee volunteers. So reach out to me if you can confirm availability for either of those. And then as far as next topics, the focus will probably be budget and natural resources. So I will connect with Robin and certainly send me any feedback if you have anything prior to the next meeting. And with that, I believe folks have had to drop off. So I'm going to adjourn the meeting.